The things most people hate about Scrum are probably not even Scrum at all. And this actually matters in subtle ways, but also doesn't really matter, which I'm going to talk about towards the end of the video. I've been a Scrum Master, an Agile coach, and in 2013, I became a licensed Scrum.org trainer, so have learned Scrum from one of the creators of Scrum. And at this point, I've led over 20 teams using Scrum. So I feel like I have some sort of expertise here about what Scrum really is. And sort of a challenge I have for anybody watching this video is that I would almost guarantee that almost everybody watching this is probably wrong about Scrum in one of these ways that I'm going to go through. Why are we still talking about Scrum in 2024 at this point? Does anybody even still really care? Well, partially no, I think. But I think it matters because words matter. If we were going to sit down and play a game of chess, when we say we're playing chess, there's an agreed upon set of rules to chess that we don't have to interpret. The rules are pretty clear. The other interesting way this matters is Scrum and Agile in particular. They're good examples of what I've heard referred to as linguistic drift or linguistic hijacking, where a word that has a very specific meaning and definition over time kind of changes and shifts in its meaning. That has 100% happened with Scrum, as I'm going to illustrate as we go through some of these things. So let's talk about the one that's probably top of mind for most people, and that is velocity and story points. And turns out neither of those things are in the Scrum Guide. Those are supplemental practices that people have added into Scrum over time. Now, the old guide did talk about where work needed to be, quote, summed. And I think this drove a lot of that behavior where we needed to assign some sort of numerical value to the work so that we could add it up and see what the capacity was in a numeric way. The newest Scrum Guide has done away with that completely. It does sort of mention burn-up charts, and I'll quote it here. Various practices exist to forecast progress, like burn-downs, burn-ups, or cumulative flows. While proven useful, these do not replace the importance of empiricism. So it talks about burn-ups a little bit as a potentially useful tool, which I question, but it doesn't prescribe any of that. Really, the only thing that the Scrum Guide talks about when it talks about predictability is this. Sprints enable predictability by ensuring inspection and adaptation of progress toward a product goal. So what Scrum has to say about predictability is the sprint itself and the various points that Scrum provides for you to inspect the progress. So another big complaint about Scrum. So when I was an Agile coach, I was working for a company and we were trying to look at how do we become more efficient. We were doing a retrospective and somebody raised their hand and said, we just have way too many meetings. And I'm thinking there's not that many meetings in Scrum. So we started putting it on a board. And with backlog refinement, with Epic Sync, the pre-dev and the post-dev amigos, the architecture review meetings, and then literally the meetings to prepare for meetings, like the long meeting that we had to prepare for the sprint review. There were close to 20 hours of meetings over the course of a sprint. And for some people, like the quote leads on the team, they had close to 30 hours of meetings in a single 2-week sprint. So yeah, this is a productivity crusher. And we often associate that with Scrum because we call these Scrum meetings. But really in Scrum, you have a sprint planning, sprint review, and a sprint retrospective. Those are the 3 meetings. Now you also have the daily scrums or stand-ups, but I don't even really include those because they can be so quick and efficient. So Scrum done well and efficiently actually reduces meetings if done well. And that is the intent, is actually to focus discussions in on these specific few meetings to reduce the ad hoc meetings over the course of a sprint. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is backlog refinement. Backlog refinement in Scrum is considered a, quote, ongoing activity. It's not something that we have to have meetings for all the teams and sit around and do planning poker and craft out all the acceptance criteria. We've added that into Scrum. So this next item is that Scrum is basically just a tool for micromanagement. And we have all felt this. And I actually do believe that Scrum, the way it is structured, kind of creates a fertile ground, so to speak, for micromanagement. It sort of enables micromanagement. It makes it easier. But Scrum itself has something to say on this. And it says right there in the guide, teams are structured and empowered by the organization to manage their own work. So in Scrum, the teams are self-managing. It's in practice where we struggle with this. And it really, you don't see a lot of true self-managing teams in practice. What we usually see are managers who really only care about the surface level things that they see they see the teams as a delivery team. So did we meet the number of points? Really what success is in Scrum is meeting a sprint goal. And the sprint goal is actually sort of detached from the number of items we say we're going to complete. So yes, Scrum is really poorly understood as a self-managing team framework and provides very little guidance on how to manage a team, and that's not really what it's intended to be. Another common complaint we hear about Scrum is that it's basically obsolete to work in sprints because with continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD, we can release way more often than just once a sprint. While it's true, like back in 2011, 2010 timeframe, Scrum did talk about release planning as part of being Scrum, but it's long since detached itself from release cadence. And it says right in the guide that multiple increments may be delivered within a sprint. So really, you can release as often as you want during a sprint. So that's kind of related into another misconception is that the sprint review is basically a demo to the stakeholders so that they can approve what's going to be released. So while it is one review per sprint, it can be an accumulation of the different increments that were released. So then in that case, like what is the point of the sprint review? And often we hear that it's a demo to stakeholders. What I've always said is if it's just a demo to stakeholders, just do a recording and send that out, via Slack or something. The sprint review is actually a collaborative working session with the stakeholders based on what was delivered to kind of help determine what's next, to discuss the overall environment where development is happening. And it says right in the guide, avoid limiting it to a presentation and that attendees collaborate on what to do next. So it's a collaborative working session. If you're just going to do a demo, then maybe it doesn't need to be a meeting. So while we're back on the topic of meetings, one of the common things you hear is that Scrum is basically Agile theater, or you might even see trainers that talk about the Scrum ceremonies. Well, the word ceremony does not appear in the Scrum Guide. The Scrum events in the Scrum Guide are not intended to be ceremony, where ceremony is just an occasion with little utility. The Scrum events are like working sessions. That's how they're actually intended to be. So this next one, oddly enough, seems to be a point of contention when it's such a small part of Scrum. But I talked in another video that I had about a dysfunction that occurred when a manager said, I really see a problem with your team because nobody is standing up at the stand-up. That was kind of strange. Like, well, it's actually called a daily Scrum because the creators of Scrum didn't want to associate it with having to stand up. We're adults. We can be comfortable while we're having a daily Scrum. I also was part of one team where I was giving my update because the daily Scrum was really a status update to our manager. And at the end of it, he said, you forgot to say no blockers. So it was like the daily Scrum became just this ritual, this status meeting where you just say what you did yesterday. You answer the 3 questions. What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And do I have any blockers? So while previous Scrum guides did talk about the 3 questions, the later versions removed it completely. So the latest version of the Scrum Guide basically says it's for the developers of the Scrum team, just the developers, just the team members. And that is where they adapt the sprint backlog as necessary, adjusting the upcoming planned work. It's a huddle. It's a quick huddle to plan the day. That's all. So for this next one, I find personally super relatable because I was a Scrum Master for a number of years for multiple teams. And I distinctly remember and am actually embarrassed about the fact that I basically became like the team's fun squad, because I didn't really know what else to do with my time. We would do those spaghetti and marshmallow games. I like dot votes everywhere. Like I had my little stationery box that I would carry around with me because I kind of thought it was my job to be the facilitator, to keep morale high, be the team dad kind of a thing. That comes from really what actually is a poor implementation of the Scrum Master role as it's described in the Scrum Guide. it's not actually a job. It was never supposed to be a job title. In fact, in the latest guide from 2020, they took the word role out even. So it's not even considered to be a role on a team. It is now an accountability, like the product owner and a developer. So trying to take those accountabilities and package it into a specific job where this one person on this team functions as that job and they don't do anything else. They're not contributing in any other way. Well, yeah, it results in people like me who went around, with our Scrum guide rolled up in one hand and then our stationery box in the other hand, and just wasting company dollars and annoying the team. Organizations implemented the Scrum Master job as a facilitator. For most of my experience, the Scrum Master didn't have the organizational clout to even do what was in the Scrum guide. It was purely a facilitator role. But in the Scrum guide, in the newest version, it actually says the Scrum Master is a, quote, true leader accountable for the team's effectiveness. So this is a leadership role where the team's effectiveness, their productivity, their morale, they're actually delivering value, the what and the how, everything, the Scrum Master is accountable for that team. So I'm going to do two more and then I'll talk about why I think none of this may even matter in the first place. So this whole idea of definition of ready, basically a checklist of things that have to happen before a team can start the work. Usually it's like we have the UX design in place. We have the architecture in place. We have the data flows in place. We have maybe even the test plan created. We have an estimate. We have a product owner that has reviewed it. There's lots of other things that can be in the definition of ready. It's essentially a contract. Well, in Scrum, there is no definition of ready. That is something that we have invented and put into Scrum and blamed Scrum for becoming waterfall when really it was never part of the framework to begin with. The only thing that Scrum really has to say about this concept of readiness is that a backlog item or user story is ready when it can be completed within a single sprint. All the additional pre-planning and stuff that we add is in hopes of being able to reduce the amount of discovery that happens during a sprint. But it's not actually Scrum, because in Scrum, it is accounting for discovery to happen during the sprint. It is based in this idea of empiricism and inspection and adaptation, where we do something and then we see what happened because we're discovering things about the world as we go that were not plannable. So this last one here, last of many, I had to cut it short. I have like 20 more, but this one is one of the most puzzling to me because of the depth of linguistic drift that has happened. And this happened to me very recently where we were talking about our team makeup and skill sets that we felt like we had missing on a team. And the comment was made that, well, we probably need like a product owner type person on the team. And I was kind of puzzled for a second because we had a product owner on the team. But what seems to have happened is the industry has turned this word product owner to mean what used to mean like business analyst. And then there's a hierarchy where a product owner maybe has one team, and then there's a product manager who has more strategic oversight over one or more teams over the entire product. And that is not at all what is in the Scrum Guide or what has ever been in the Scrum Guide. The product, and what's puzzling to me is because product owner, it's in the name. They own the product. So how has the industry like relegated product owner down to like a team level analyst or requirements person? I don't really get it. There isn't even really a product manager in the Scrum Guide. There isn't this idea of a hierarchy on the product side. That's something that we implement on top of and inside of Scrum. And also, even with the backlog management piece, the product owner in Scrum isn't even necessarily the one who's writing the user stories. They can delegate that whole process to the team. Could be to a business analyst or, GASP, the developers themselves could write user stories. So hopefully I've illustrated that the industry has sort of bent Scrum and sort of morphed it and mutated it and turned it into something that it really was never designed to be. But like, who actually cares? Really, I don't think it matters overall because honestly, I think Scrum lost. I think one, we're not going to take back the actual meaning of Scrum by preaching about Scrum butts and saying that's not Scrum. And it's one of the reasons I got out of Agile coaching, because that kind of became the mantra, and like the job of an Agile coach was to just like argue against the business people about what was and wasn't Agile and Scrum. and it's became pointless. And the word has changed. It doesn't mean what's in the Scrum guide anymore. The Agile industrial complex has turned Scrum into a tool for micromanaging the delivery, the kind of the more factory style delivery of software development teams. So please, again, tell me what you think in the comments. If you just couldn't care less, well, then you're probably not watching now at this point anyway, but let me know. Let me know some other ways that the industry has tweaked and changed Scrum, or other sort of dysfunctions that you've seen that you are lamenting, the way it could have been. And just remember, we can get worked up about this kind of stuff, but ultimately it doesn't actually really matter. It's not what really matters most in life, which is your family, your friends, your health, your well-being. We can get kind of wrapped up in all these definitions and the way we wish things could be and should be, but ultimately I think that keeps us stuck. And I talk about similar things in this video with specifically around Agile and is it really dead, and similar concept of Agile sort of being stolen from us. So I just really wish you the best, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.